This is one of their mobile kitchens that they actually...
Is that even some, what I call habitual...
Beautiful Stop and Shop in the Wilton. Penalty, but it was actually a tax, and that it...
Absolutely. What's the name of the show?
Good evening and welcome once again to the Marty Heiser Show. We have an incredible show. I mean, I feel, somewhat humbled in the presence of these great minds. We have an author who went to Sarah Lawrence University. If you know where that is, it's a very she neighborhood down in Bronxville, New York. She was involved with the Fulbright Scholarship. She speaks German fluently, and she's written a book called With You, There Is Light. It's a story about resistance to Hitler's Germany from very young college students that went to University of Munich. But it's more than just a story about their resistance. It's a love story between her and a soldier in the German army, and how they were wrestling with their conscience and how they decided to finally lash out against Hitler and the Nazis by making pamphlets and putting them around, which seems in our freedom of speech era like not that big a deal, but in Nazi Germany in the middle of the war, when they had just been pushed back, I think it was the 4th Army, the 6th Army, the German 6th Army under Paulus was pushed back from Leningrad. It was a country that was on a war footing. And to speak out against the Führer, the leader, was considered treasonous. And she ended up paying with her life, 21 years old. And it's a story about her quest to try to have some sort of a voice against what she saw all around. And after that, we have Rabbi John Haddon, who's coming on as well, and Dr. Evan Levine will be joining us as well to talk about the unrest in Jerusalem, the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, what Hamas is doing on the border. Is it a real conflict, or are these people cannon fodder for a photo op on international TV? So stay tuned, it's going to be good. And we even have Dave Straight. Dave Straight has a bit of a cult following. He will come in here with his unique, loquacious perspective on things, so he'll be joining us as well. But Alexandra Lehman, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
I really, really love this book. With You, There Is Light. What motivated you to write it? What was the thinking behind it?
At first it was a negative motivation, and then it turned into a positive one. Mm-hmm. Negative in that growing up in America, I was subject to a type of racism where I was called a Nazi growing up, and both my parents were German. So I thought that there was another face of the war, namely that my parents had suffered greatly as children during the war, and that this is something that we as a country should understand more, that everyone suffers under totalitarianism. And then later, as I found out who Sophie was writing to, I found out it was a love story. So I wanted to write the love story, which then turned it into a positive motivation.
And it's interesting because within that love story, as you walk through it, Sophie and Fritz. And Fritz is a communications officer in the Wehrmacht. And there's a difference between the SS and the Nazis and the Wehrmacht. The Wehrmacht was the military arm, and the SS was sort of this political, racist, do bad stuff arm. But at some point, the guilt overlapped.
Yes.
And that's what Fritz talked about in letters to Sophie. One was in Amsterdam, where they were crushing an uprising in Amsterdam, and he heard gunfire, and then it stopped. And then later on the Russian front, he saw what these special units were doing with the Jews and liquidating them. And it was a coming of realization, it seems like, for Fritz and his communications with Sophie. And as 20 and 21-year-old kids, they're saying, we have to do something. How did you capture that?
How did I capture
In the book, what were your thought process behind that, using that relationship
Well, that
to
there
tell
was
a
a
story?
very moral, complex thing going on here. You have a woman who grew up in the Hitler Youth who turns against Hitler, but she's also in love with an officer in Hitler's army, forced to serve. So how do they continue to love one another when they're on such polar opposite sides, where she takes on a crusade to convince him or to show him that he has been caught in a terrible situation and he's going to have to make a choice himself.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because at the end of the book, you pose some pretty compelling questions. Let me see if I can find them. Yeah, here we go. Here's just one, question 4. Imagine you had to choose a career in the military upon graduating from a school like West Point or Annapolis. A dictator takes over your country, putting political opponents in jail and taking away rights guaranteed in the Constitution. He has also named himself the head of the armed forces. Would you continue to serve in the military? Why or why not? And these were some of the qualms that they were looking at.
Right. Yeah. Of course, they had to serve under penalty of death, the same way as if a German army officer was not a member of the party, he was sent to Stalingrad, whereas members of the party might not have been sent to the most horrific battles.
Wow, and that's where he ended up, kind of freezing it. This is a little, it's 3 minutes, but this is a little kind of background of the characters. I'm going to play this, and then I want to get your reaction to this. I don't know if we have it queued up. I'm not sure they got that on camera just yet. Oh, here we go, here we go. Okay, here we go.
Joined the Hitler Youth. They, like so many, bought the lie that Hitler would bring hope and prosperity back to Germany. But between her father's early anti-Nazi stance and her own careful observations, Sophie soon realized that Nazism was utterly incompatible with her Christianity. The letters Sophie received from her boyfriend, who had been conscripted into the army, which told of the atrocities the Nazis were committing, further convinced her that she needed to act and the truth needed to be told. Simply leaving the Hitler Youth was not enough for Sophie, but open dissent in Nazi Germany was tantamount to signing her own death certificate. So with her brother and 4 other friends, she formed the White Rose, an underground nonviolent resistance movement dedicated to educating German youths about the evils of Nazism. The White Rose studied theology, philosophy, and politics together. And initially, Hans wanted that to be the extent of Sophie's involvement. But she insisted on being fully engaged in the activism, convincing the men that as a female, she was far less likely to be stopped by the SS. The group purchased a typewriter and a duplicating machine, and by 1942 had begun disseminating their leaflets around the campus of the University of Munich, where Hans was a medical student and Sophie an undergrad. They also initiated an anti-Nazi and anti-Hitler graffiti campaign. As their mission grew, Sophie would buy the paper and stamps at several locations so as not to raise suspicion, and thousands of leaflets were mailed from different posts. However, in February of 1943, a utility man saw Sophie distributing the group's literature on campus. She was arrested by the Gestapo, tortured, and sentenced to death for high treason. As she was led to the guillotine, Sophie uttered her last words. "How can we expect righteousness to prevail when there is hardly anyone willing to give himself up individually to a righteous cause? Such a fine sunny day, and I have to go. But what does my death matter if through us, thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action?" She was 21 years old. Sophie Scholl is a hero you should know. And I'm Dr. Ross Porter.
So that was the young girl, really. I got to call her a girl, you can't really call it, but that you captured so beautifully in this book. And she was on a mission to make a statement, and in the book it talks about the pamphlets that she made, and where she finally got caught was in this sort of atrium of a school, and they had they were distributing the pamphlets, and there were some extra pamphlets, and she just threw them off the balcony. And she had a point. It's on page 277. It says, taking in the agitation caused by the students reading the leaflets. So these students, she had distributed the leaflets. A warm wave swept over and through her, and for one brief moment, she knew that she had succeeded. It had been worth it. And then she talks about like the guilt that the nation of Germany should be feeling for what they're doing. She says, I will never regret what I did, Sophie finally spoke. Her words seemed at odds with the bent over frame and the tear-stained cheeks. My conscience is free. I will personally not be held accountable for the insanity that took over my country. And that's what she said in front of this Nazi judge. She's like, right back at you. I took a stand. What you people are doing is insane. As a German, did you grow up in Germany?
No, I didn't. I was educated there and worked there, translated there, but I grew up in the United States.
See, I think you were, because I did too. My mother grew up in Germany, and I feel like maybe for both of us, we were spared that generational guilt
Do you think
of
so?
what went on.
Have you?
I think so. Maybe I have a fairly shallow personality, so I can deflect things very well. But I feel like I have. My father fought against the Nazis. I liked Eisenhower, and my mother was like 11 years old during World War II.
Wow.
But I don't know. But you feel it more passionately, I guess.
That's a question more, I think, also of shame. These are very closely allied emotions, right? Shame and guilt. So there's been a over the period of working on this book, I've seen a tremendous change in how the history has been digested. And now in this country, it's no longer really embarrassing to be German.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that, Marty?
I think so. I mean, I think, there's like a heritage, German heritage. Eisenhower, for gosh sakes, comes from a German line, and he was, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces that put an end to Nazism.
Right, right.
But I had an experience, and I don't mean to make it all about me, but it's the Marty Heiser show. What are you going to do? I went to see the movie Schindler's List. This has got to be 20 years ago now, maybe even more, when it first came out, at a theater in Westport. And the theater was so filled, all they had was seats in the front. And as you watch Schindler's List, and you try to make sense of your Tante und Oma und Opa und Papa und Tante Gillo and Frank and Werner, and the culture that brought Bach and Beethoven,
Right.
and these great advancements in humanity, and the Lutheran Church, the Reformation, all this wonderful things, and yet there's this insidious race-based eugenics nonsense that caused the mass murder. And I'm watching this movie, and you've seen it, it unfolds, and the entire audience is crying. You can hear the weeping in this dark movie theater.
Right.
And I just break down as well. And I'm crying with the Jews that had something like this happen. But I don't know if I share the guilt. I don't know if I carry that burden. I've never, Heiser, you must be one of those Germans. I've never had that, but maybe I've had a different experience.
Right. Well, I went on a journey to find out both individually where my grandfathers were in the war. So
How'd that work
that's
out?
partly why I'm was so interested in Fritz, because both my grandfathers served on the Russian front.
Okay.
And it worked out in that I had to be at peace that I would never really know.
Wow.
Even though I found my grandfather's military papers and they exonerated him from being part of the Holocaust machinery, being just an enlisted soldier, I still had to accept the fact that I will never know for sure.
Yeah. I've had similar experiences. My wife, when we first got married, we went over to Germany for our honeymoon. And we stayed at my Tante Gilla's house in Bad Godesberg, lovely house. And she comes, she says, Marty, you gotta come here, you gotta see this. And I was like, what? And it was this beautifully framed picture of a 50-year anniversary of my Tante Gote or something like that. And 50 years ago, here he is in his German military uniform with his bride, and now here we are 50 years later, and they have this, beautiful thing. And so, yeah, what was my extended family doing during World War II? I have a cousin who's a documentary filmmaker, and my grandfather has passed away, but he looked into it, and he was on the Russian front as well, but there is some residual guilt, I guess, in some of that. Although I don't feel as much as my cousins because they're over there and I'm here, and we were the good guys because we came in there and took them out.
Right. Well, it's definitely, I think it's forming part of what Chancellor Merkel's policies are. I think that residual guilt is part of her allowing 1.5 million refugees into the country.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You think that to sort of racially work it out?
I think that it would be false for us to assume that couldn't have been one of the factors that played into her accepting them when so many European nations said no.
And how do you think that's going to work out for Germany and in Sweden? It's a whole nother subject.
Right.
With the refugee issue that they're working with, do you have any thoughts on that?
None that I'd like to get into here.
Okay. Because it is.
No, I realized I was going to walk right into that, but I would say that the history constantly informs the present. As an historian, as a writer, I will continue believing that always.
And how, as a German nation, can Germany ever get away from that? Is it ever expunged?
No, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be. But the book is really, for me, about the power of one voice. Have you ever heard people on your show say they don't vote or they shouldn't vote? Because what does one vote matter?
Yeah.
They have nothing to do with policy. And anyone who really believes that should read this book.
Yeah, because it's called With You There Is Light, and it is a story about young people. I was struck, especially in those pictures, how young she was, and yet they said, we have to do something. And by taking their lives in their own hand, putting these leaflets together, mailing them out, distributing them, we would think nothing of it, but in Hitler's Germany, especially at that point in the war, you paid with your life.
And there's so many cross sections now. We can look at social media. How would producing leaflets compare with 140 character tweets?
Yeah.
The whole communications aspect of it is also fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I love the book very much. I highly recommend it. With You There Is Light, how can people get a hold of this? Is like Amazon?
Well, they can go to Amazon, but they can also go to my website. It's cheaper on my website.
Okay.
All right.
This is non-commercial public access, but they just go to With You There Is Light?
No, AlexandraLehman.com.
AlexandraLehman.com.
Or Amazon.com.
Amazon.com.
And Marty, thanks for reading it. You were really,
Yeah.
I'm very, thank you very much.
No. I liked it a lot. I really felt like it was very insightful. It was very interesting to see that whole period. There's a couple great mysteries, and one is the rise of Nazism in Germany in the interwar periods, and how can we avoid that? And it just makes me so happy and so proud to be an American because of our diversity and our, melting pot that we have, although some people don't think we do, but we actually do. And again, I don't mean to go off on tangents, but I was down in Coney Island on their boardwalk. We were going to a concert, my wife and I, and there were Hasidic Jews, there were Orthodox Muslims, there were Hispanics, there were gays, there was blacks, rosy-cheeked white guys from the suburbs like me, and everyone was just having, like, they were fishing and they were selling, corn, and you had the Muslims in their burqas, and you had the Orthodox Jews with the thing, and everyone was just having a great summer evening on the boardwalk.
America the Beautiful.
And I thought that's really great. You know? And it's our ideal. It's what we strive for. And I think at the end of the day, we've got it right. I don't think Hitler would have a chance. And no matter how ticked off people are, first of all, we're not giving up our guns. Secondly, the Jews, who some of which you're going to meet right now, they don't go for this anymore. No one's marching into any trains or anything else. And I think hopefully we've solved that problem anyways. But listen, I don't mean to go on and on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marty.
The book again is called With You There Is Light, the story of Sophie Scholl and her experiences. You got to read this book. It's really good. Thanks a lot. Okay, next we have, it's interesting because I talked about this show, we have an author, a rabbi, and a cardiologist. And you say that sounds like the beginning of, like a setup for a joke or something like that. But we have Rabbi John Hannon is going to be joining us right now, and Dr. Evan Levine, if that name rings a bell, he's a world-renowned, maybe nationally known cardiologist, but he also has a blog, he has a TV presence, and he has opinions on what's going on in the world, and I've always appreciated his input. But I especially wanted to get the rabbi on this week because on all of our television screens, we've seen a couple things. We've seen unrest in the Middle East, which is kind of like saying, wow, we saw the sun come up this morning, because there's always unrest in the Middle East. But in this case, there could be some game-changing dynamics going on, one of which is what Barack Obama promised, George H.W. Bush promised, George W. Bush promised, Bill Clinton promised, I think the Congress promised, everyone promised they're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem. Well, lo and behold, here comes Donald Trump, and he actually says he's going to do it, and he does it. So earlier this week, the embassy was moved. There was a ceremony that happened when that happened, and there was unrest at the border on the Gaza Strip where Hamas-motivated protesters went forward, and there was casualties. And what do we make of all this? Is this possibly a turn in the peace process that hasn't worked until now? What to make of all this? That's why I brought in, may I say, my rabbi. Everyone should have a rabbi, and I do. His name is John Hannon. Thank you so much.
Marty,
appreciate it very much.
Good
Good doctor. Thank you so much for coming in. I thought of it. I'm sitting at a red light, and I'm thinking, I got to talk to my rabbi, what to make of all this, where is God in all this, and could this be a good thing? Because I kind of think it might be a good thing.
You know, Marty, for those of us who are Jewish and know a little bit of Hebrew, to see on all the networks, to hear the Shehachianu prayer, which I'll say in Hebrew and then in English, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Shehachianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh, said by Ambassador Friedman and also by Netanyahu. They did the blessing twice. Okay. It means, praised art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has given us life, sustained us, and enabled us to reach this moment. And you know, we've talked many times, Marty, I love you dearly. I'm not a great fan of President Trump, but on this issue, I congratulate him from the bottom of my heart. You are exactly right. Of all the presidents in recent times who have promised a return to the capital, Jerusalem, Donald Trump delivered. And for that, I applaud him, I congratulate him, and he brought great pride to my heart, and I know to the other 6, 7, 8 million Jews in America and throughout the world. This was a great moment. It was a great day.
Wow, wow.
And you know, even at the end of the show, that beautiful woman who sang, did you hear what she said? She sang the song in English, she sang it in Hebrew, shalom, peace, and also included salam, which is the Arabic word for peace. What other country would do a song at the end of this event praying for peace with her Arab neighbors? Salam.
Yeah.
Incredible moment. And I heard it with my own ears, and thank God my Hebrew is good enough that I understood all the Hebrew that morning. It was an incredible moment.
Wow. I saw Joe Lieberman in the audience. Could
He
that
was
have
there.
been?
We did have a
Joel,
few
okay.
Democrats. I wish we would have had more, but I guess he's an independent. But the Democrats, I don't think were well represented, but he was there, and it was great to see him.
Oh.
I know him personally, great man.
I like Joe Lieberman. He
like
wouldn't
him.
work on the Sabbath, right? That was
No,
kind
he
of his
wouldn't.
thing.
He wouldn't.
He
He's
was
a-
like the Chick-fil-A of the Jewish guy, but he wouldn't work on it.
Listen, I admire Chick-fil-A. You know, he gives his workers a Sabbath
There you
on
go.
Sunday, and that's pretty tremendous.
Close enough. What do
It's
you-
close enough.
So what do you think? You think this is a new day for the peace negotiations? Could something work here? Could the art of the deal be working out in the Middle East?
Well, I'm glad the rabbi supports Donald Trump on this issue. Will you vote for him next year?
Oh, boy.
Rabbi?
It's okay. Not
I
a
said
lot,
on
not a lot
this
of people
issue.
watch
Okay.
this.
On this issue, listen, we wish the president well, no matter what our affiliation. We want America to thrive, of course.
Oh yeah.
And I appreciate that because I think so many Americans, liberal Americans in the media, hate Donald Trump so much they'd rather see the country fail as long as Donald fails. And this is one situation, Rabbi, where Donald Trump went out and did something that all the prior presidents in the past 20 years had promised to do, and yet they put a spin on it. If you saw the cover of the New York Daily News about his daughter, they called
ghoul, yeah.
the ghoul, and
Yeah.
and the cover.
They
Trump
could just
Trump
say-
puts embassy in Jerusalem. 52 Palestinians murdered.
Yeah.
You see the spin? It's
a
not
spin.
appropriate because some of the liberal media, Rabbi, hate Donald Trump so much they'd rather see the nation fail. And this is one circumstance. This was a beautiful move. It
was
was
a great move.
appropriate. It was time to support a country that supports America like no other country supports America. This has nothing to be with having to do be Jewish or not. Okay,
This
I'm
is
not a
great-
very religious person.
This is a great moment for the world.
Exactly.
And that's the way I see it. Marty, if you indulge me for 1 second, I just
Please.
want to quote from a very good man, David Harris, who's the executive director of the American Jewish Committee, had this to say in the Jerusalem Post 2 days ago.
Okay.
I'm just going to read three paragraphs.
Please.
Every country ought to have the right to choose its own capital, but that basic political rule applies to every nation on earth except one.
Right.
No doubt diplomats assigned to Australia would prefer to be situated in Melbourne or Sydney, but the political choice was Canberra, and that was fine. Nor did anyone utter a peep when Germany, following reunification, moved its capital from Bonn to Berlin, compelling governments around the world to spend a fortune and find new premises in Berlin. The same goes for Kazakhstan, which decided to move its capital from Almaty to Astana in 1998, again disrupting the lives of every country that had a diplomatic post in the Central Asian nation. Israel has the right, the historical right, to put its capital in Jerusalem, and we have been praying for May 14th since the year 73 of the Common Era. Every single Jew in every single liturgy, we pray 3 times a day. We say, Shalom al Yisrael, peace for Jerusalem. At the end of every Passover Seder in the world, from time immemorial, we say, Lishana Haba'ah Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. I want your viewers and the people who are watching this program to realize what a profound moment this is for the Jewish people, for the United States, and of course what the doctor said, for the entire world. That's the way we look at this. This is the right thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think at some point, they say Hamas is very upset. It loses its sting after a while.
When are they not upset?
When are they not upset?
That's what I'm saying. I mean, it loses their sting. And then they have, there were shootings and they were shot. And there was this one NBC commentator that, what is it, shoot at will? And I know that guy because I saw him on election night. And it was when Hillary wasn't, acquiescing to what happened. I said, what happened to the peaceful transfer of power? I can't hear you. And this guy pulled his ear.
Marty, when you hear... Israelis kill 61 Palestinians.
Yeah.
What they forget to tell you is 61 Palestinians go with machetes, knives, and guns to try to infiltrate into Israel. If, God forbid, the people of Toronto were to come in with machetes, guns, and knives into Buffalo, New York, I wonder what the police in Buffalo, New York would do. We defend our nation. We mourn for the deaths of anybody. God forbid, we're not happy that anyone has to die, but Israel has the right to defend itself.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you hear that, I mean, that's the headline. Oh, this is terrible, you know what's happening. But then all of a sudden you look at the video and you see what was going on, and you see the tires that are being burned, and you see the throng of thousands and thousands coming up to the border.
Imagine if they didn't stop that.
Yeah. And
what would America do? What would it with Canada or Mexico? Israel, you know, and the world forgets, Israel is the size of New Jersey. It's the size of Lake Michigan. The border between Israel and Gaza is the border between Weston and Wilton. It's the border between Danbury and Bethel.
Yeah.
We have to protect ourselves.
Yeah, and then you start looking at, I'll try to cue up some of the videos you guys are talking, but you look at it and they're flying kites over the border. And
not kites with fire on it to destroy Israeli property.
Yeah, and they're setting fires and all of a sudden you're responding to that.
But what they did destroy is they destroyed their electricity. They destroyed,
Hamas.
Yeah, they destroyed their own electricity. Now they have no gas, no water. It's a shame because I think the majority of those people are just misinformed, decent people led by a bunch of horrible individuals who would send innocent folks and tell them, this was in the New York Times, that the fence was open. Even the New York Times reported that Hamas told their people the fence was open and they were going through the border. But how many of the Hamas leaders sent their own family, you see?
Right.
They're sending in these young boys, these young
innocent
men,
people. They don't know
sending
better.
in children because, Marty, it's a great photo op, but it's a tragic story. When the Palestinians start reacting like victims and get their own country in order, there will be peace.
Yeah. Now, my understanding is that when they gave, because they say, give land for peace, give land for peace, and so they gave the Gaza Strip.
There has not been a Jew living in Gaza since 2005, and there were beautiful villages, beautiful condominium developments, people living peacefully, and we left greenhouses for the Gazans.
Yeah.
And instead of using the greenhouses, which could have generated millions of dollars of income for them, they destroyed it, took the steel, and made out of it Qassam rockets to fire into Sderot.
Yeah, and how many of those rockets were actually fired? They would sort of collect them as they.
Who knows?
I mean, there was hundreds and hundreds of these rockets that are fired. And by the way, that video that we're just showing was from the Jewish perspective, as they're seeing these fires lapping up on their border. And then there was video of gunfire that was shot. They show the bullets in the houses of the Jews there. And it's interesting because for my previous guest, in a different era, there was a different mindset among the Jews. And depending on how you look at it in Europe.
They didn't have the advantage of history. They didn't have the
IDF.
And when we Jews say never again, we mean it. We're not kidding. When someone says to us, we're going to kill you, we don't look at it as a joke. It's not a great joke to the Jewish community. We know that they mean it, and we are going to do everything to defend ourselves. But it's so interesting, Marty, and I wish your audience could grasp this too. Every single Israeli war song is a song of peace. Yeah. Israel wants nothing else more than to dissolve its army, to be able to be a country to devote itself to finding the cure for cancer and the cure for solving disease. And with the Jewish mind, the Jewish cup, we could. But unfortunately and tragically, Israel finds itself in a very bad neighborhood.
Yeah, but they're in a bad neighborhood, but they have made the desert blossom. Yeah. I mean, when you look at Tel Aviv, when you look at Israel, what you have produced there,
it's remarkable. Totally remarkable.
It's unbelievably remarkable. And then you compare that with the countries that are all around there that have all the options, all the oil reservoirs in the world, everything.
If you ever take the internal airline of Israel, it's called Arkia. Arkia Airlines goes to Eilat. And on one side, as it flies to Eilat, you can see the Jordanian city of Aqaba on your left, Eilat on your right. You're in the airplane, you look down at the left, and you see Aqaba, desert. You look to the right, and you see Eilat, the Garden of Eden. Take your choice.
Yeah, it's so. What's the final solution? How do we? Bad choice of words, actually. What is the final resolution?
Final resolution. Yes.
My bad.
Yeah. No, don't worry. Marty, your heart's in the right place. Don't worry about it.
I hope so. But what is the final resolution? How do we get out of this? And I'm a big Trump fan. I like what he's doing on the Korean Peninsula here.
Yep.
I think when people say, oh, we're going to have fire and fury like you've never seen before. But then when all of a sudden we send the vice president to Gaza to meet the Palestinian authorities and they refuse to meet him, Trump's like, wait a second, get the accounting guy in there. How much are we giving to these guys a year? It's like, oh, hell no, that's not going to last. And then he talks to him like a Queens contractor and says, you disrespect my vice president, you're not even going to meet with him, and we give you all this money? And all of a sudden, I'd like to think that this different approach, because what we've been trying hasn't been working both on the Korean Peninsula and in the Middle East, this different approach might bear some fruit. What do you think, Doctor?
Maybe it will.
What do you think
we're all the same when we come out of the womb. And somehow these poor kids who are left poor, these Palestinian kids, because the leaders of Hamas want
Kept
them
poor.
They want them to be poor. They're taking all the money building tunnels, building weaponry. They're not feeding them because when they have nothing else, they'll be their cannon fodder. Somehow,
literally, that's what we saw this past
somehow
week.
we have to give them hope and re-educate them. It's not easy, of course. We have to do something about that leadership. But the world's afraid to do that. These Hamas leaders have to go. Okay? There needs to be a Gandhi, a Martin Luther King, someone there that can lift these people up to enjoy life. Because let's face it, when the Palestinian people come to the States, they're quite successful folks.
Good. Yeah, they're very entrepreneurial.
Exactly.
Very
they get out of that environment.
Doctor,
it's
at Hadassah Hospital, Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, are made up of many Palestinian doctors.
Yeah.
The overwhelming number of Palestinians are good and decent people who want salam, peace, as much as Jews want shalom. The overwhelming number. And that's the tragedy.
But when you speak out and you get a bullet in your head,
what do you do?
Just like this girl who spoke out and the Nazis killed her. You've seen the homosexuals in the Gaza, whatever. They kill them, they drag them from the bikes, right? People who speak out are missing and dead. It's the same thing. Somehow, someone has to put an end to this type of leadership.
I agree with the doctor. We need new leadership. The Palestinians are entitled to their own autonomy, but they have to bring in the right people for leaders, and surely not Hamas and not the PLO.
All right, we're this far away from solving the Middle East and bringing peace to it. We're gonna switch gears just a little bit. We're being joined for the roundtable discussion. This is tough. This is the arena, but we're being joined by Dave Straight, who always has a wealth of information, so we want to get your input on that. I do want to talk to you a little bit about medicine and where we're going and your cardiology practice and you're opening an office in Ridgefield.
Great news.
Well, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Well, I've joined a company called ProHealth.
Okay.
It is the largest provider of healthcare in Connecticut, almost 400,000 lives.
Okay.
And I'm going to start a cardiovascular service for them.
Now we're talking about this in non-commercial aspect.
Right.
This is a public policy and medicine and so forth. Yes.
And I live in Ridgefield, and I'm going to start practicing in Ridgefield and Danbury, and hope to help folks with my cost-effective care. We'll never take a dollar from Big Pharma.
Yeah, you've talked about Big Pharma not being right, Obamacare not being right, all the restrictions.
Unnecessary stress tests, unnecessary echoes, drugs that cost too much, not from me.
And you're not a big fan of testosterone creams, as I recall. That was a big problem.
That's correct.
I'm not a young man anymore, and I mean, my wife's happy and all, but a little bit of the...
Some men actually need it. The majority of them go to some charlatan and get the cream to look and feel better when they don't need it.
Testosterone cream, Rabbi, what are your thoughts? Oh, never mind. Look at your wife giggling back there.
Nobody has ever accused me of not being passionate or...
Could we get the rabbi's wife in here? We need to get a round table. No, let's go. Dave, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to start by apologizing for dragging down the average IQ on the set.
No, listen,
what you have is real scholars
you
here.
should have met this author. She's a Fulbright scholarship.
was
Sarah
brilliant.
Lawrence
Yeah,
University
totally
wrote this book. You know,
Well,
you don't
just
even
want to
read
comment.
books, let alone write a book, for gosh sakes. I take that back.
Rabbi
You do,
Haddon,
you do.
you performed the burial ceremony for Arthur Koch in Reading.
Yes, I did.
You did a marvelous job on that. I just wanted to comment. He was a great friend of mine,
Oh, really?
and
Thank you so much.
wonderful family. And I thought you really did a fine job
Thank
on
you.
that.
I'm touched
And
by that.
the reason I jumped on the show is to sign up to be your first patient.
Thank you.
Because I told you that when you get relocated
I
up
remember
here,
that.
I am 100% going to you. So I'm on board
Awesome.
for that. So let me just bring up
What
one
do you got
concept.
for me? What do you got for me? Nothing
Dude,
but
you
love?
just bring me on to read the credits, right? You
Okay,
go,
no,
I need
go
a
ahead.
third person to fill a spot. Okay, so regarding the nation of Israel, have you guys heard this this reference amongst Christian circles that are viewing Donald Trump as like comparable to King Cyrus? Have you heard that comparison at all?
I do know we have many friends, thank God, in the Christian community, especially in the fundamentalist Christian community. But to compare him to King Cyrus is the one who I think defeated Nebuchadnezzar, and the Persians at that time in history were very good to the Jewish people. So we like Cyrus. In fact, Cyrus was so well liked it became a name very popular in the Jewish community, just like Alexander.
Well, right, and King Cyrus is the one that empowered the Israelis to rebuild the temple.
He did. You're correct. In defeating the Babylonians after the Babylonian exile, Cyrus and Xerxes, the leaders of the Persians, became very magnanimous and encouraging of the Jewish people under Zerubbabel to rebuild the Second Temple. You are correct.
Wow.
Bravo.
See, you got to do your homework, right? So, but what I find is interesting is that amongst Christian circles, they're kind of viewing, and it's a stretch, and it's taking some liberties with Trump, but viewing Trump as one of the biggest supporters of the nation of Israel in as long as I can remember, right? I mean, Nixon came to their aid in one particular war, right? And the globe kind of came to the recognizing Israel as a nation back in the 40s, which is a great thing. But Donald Trump, when every other president cowered, Donald Trump has stood right there with the nation
He
of Israel.
is extraordinarily popular in Israel. Absolutely.
And all of a sudden, we have all these other countries want to move their embassies.
Well,
to
thank God
Jerusalem as well.
Guatemala.
Yeah, we got Guatemala.
has. And listen,
Things are looking up.
no, Guatemala was pro-Israel back in the early 1950s. The first one to
were the
recognize
second.
Israel after 1948. And also Paraguay is on its way. So I think the other countries of the world are going to see the light, to use a bad metaphor, but are going to see the light, and I think are going to move their emphases to Israel.
So can
to
I
Jerusalem.
get both your opinions on how you think Trump's posturing towards Iran? Good thing, bad thing? Is it time to rescind that agreement and put sanctions on them? Do they pose a threat? I mean, if they have nuclear capability, is it a big deal?
I'm going to defer to the doctor on this
Uh-oh,
one because
he doesn't
when it
like
comes
what
to
you
the
just said, in
Iran
other
thing,
words.
on a certain level, I think it might have been a mistake, but I don't know. I want to believe that Mr. Trump, that our president, surrounded by people who are very knowledgeable, I want to believe they know what they're doing. But Iran is a powerhouse. We fear Iran, and
It's a powerhouse.
I don't know what's going to
What
be.
are we?
I-
Iran's a
yeah.
powerhouse?
Well-
what's the United States?
So is the United
We're
States.
a powerhouse.
Okay.
They're nothing. Why?
Hey, we attack countries even when they don't do anything wrong. Like
Yeah, Bush.
Like the Syrian chemical attack, right? That's undocumented, unsubstantiated, and yet we're bombing
Guys,
them
forgive
anyway.
me, but
to
I
send
don't want to
missiles.
see a war between Israel and Iran.
I don't want to see a war anywhere.
I don't want to see
Exactly.
a war, period.
Right,
That's
right.
So
true.
therefore, the answer to your question, which I'm not answering, is I don't know if it was a good move or not. I just am not sure.
Didn't in the
We'll have to
last
see.
2 weeks, didn't the Israelis take out Syrian positions, or no, Iranian positions in Syria?
Yeah, they
Quite
did.
dramatically, quite
150
efficiently.
jets took off, and
150,
150
this is
jets
not
landed.
Jets returned.
Not one shot down.
Yeah. Yeah,
Pretty
this
amazing.
vaunted air defense, this vaunted missile defense, when Trump did his little missile attack number 2, after the gas attack that we all know actually happened, even though Dave Straight doesn't really believe with that. He found somewhere where it didn't. But anyways, but the point being, there's definitely a more muscular posture against Iran that we've seen. And then I help
And
me
for
with
all we
this.
know, Marty, it might be the right posture.
Could be. Well, we got the
not-
Sunnis and
that-
we got the Shia.
That not collapsing could be the best policy.
Yeah.
And the show of strength could be the best policy. I'm in the wait and see camp.
Me too.
But again, I have to believe our president knows what he's doing.
It's interesting. I'm in the wait and see on Korea.
Yeah.
Well, you know, let's see what happens.
See what happens.
Let's see what happens in the Middle East. But one thing I like is that, you know, it's like a football team. You know, we were throwing the ball. We kept getting intercepted, and we're not scoring any touchdowns. Now we're trying a running game.
We're trying
something
We're
different.
running with the ball.
We're running with the ball. We got a different quarterback there, and
I agree.
we know for sure that what we were doing in Korea wasn't working because this guy kept getting better missiles, and now they're nuclear tipped. And we know what's happening in the Middle East hasn't worked out to date. So let's see what
Speaking of football, every president prior was punting the ball.
Yeah.
Right? They're just punting the ball to the next guy.
To the next president.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what they did. And now Iran is much more powerful, also thanks to Mr. Bush. Right?
But hasn't Trump more recently gotten together with the Arabs? They had that big meeting, I believe it was in Saudi Arabia. It was unheralded, but it actually happened, where he got a lot of the Arab nations together because they too view Iran as a threat. But Iran is in cahoots with the head guy Bashar in Syria, and so he sort of has his allies. And under the guise of getting rid of ISIS, they've infiltrated Syria now.
And I'll tell you
I think that's what the 150 jets were about. It's very
another
complicated.
tragedy is that Iran and Israel used to have very good relations, and they could again.
Iran was a cosmopolitan nation.
Iran and Israel. This is what I dream of because I'm a dreamer. I believe that if there could be peace between Israel and Iran, it would be great for Tehran, it would be great for Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Because the Iranians and the Israelis at one point in our history, and hundreds and thousands of years ago, got along, as I mentioned, under Xerxes and Darius and Cyrus. But wouldn't it be great if we could somehow go back to the Ayatollahs, to the time when El Al flew between Tel Aviv and Tehran?
Didn't Iran have
That's what I dream of.
second largest group of Jewish people in the Middle East?
Absolutely.
Right?
At one time they did
and they
have.
had a thriving Christian community
Yeah.
in Iran as well.
So the tragedy is
As a matter
not
of fact,
the Iranian.
The Iran church is the fastest growing church in the
Then
country.
came Jimmy
I'm told.
Carter, and that was the end of it.
But the tragedy is the Iranian people. They bad leaders, but the people themselves are okay.
The most successful immigrants in this country right now, Iranians.
Yeah.
And the Iranian Jews who've come to our country have been incredibly successful. Very smart people.
And there was this green revolution in Iran that they rose up. Remember that one lady that got shot and she bled out on video? We played it on the show because we're not afraid of being censored. But there is. I think the people are not necessarily lockstep with the Ayatollahs.
Look who we had, Ahmadinejad, and these Ayatollahs are running this country.
Yeah, but look who has the guns, man.
That's the thing.
You know, it probably would have helped our relationship with Iran had we not overthrown a duly elected leader of Iran back in the 50s and put our guy, the Shah, in.
Probably.
Who was the duly? I really don't know. I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
I don't know. But you're correct.
But the Shah was a kind of a puppet that they put in
the fifth, and this is something that Ron Paul brings up all the time, and his name escapes me. But he was a hero of the Iranian people, and this guy got elected in a overwhelming majority of the population.
Yeah.
The U.S. sent the CIA in there and said, you know what, this guy's going to try and do something with the oil wells, and Great Britain's involved, and they want to keep the royalty relationship. 90% to Great Britain, 10% to Iran. And the guy that they elected said, we don't like that arrangement. We sent the CIA in there, and in a week overturned and got the guy thrown out of office, put the Shah in, and from that point on, the nation of Iran hated America.
Yeah,
and we deserved that.
Yeah, it's true.
Very
and then the Shah had the secret police who were out, and they were very heavy-handed.
Yep.
And it was bad all around.
But it's worse now.
You know, it's interesting. I saw this video. It was like expanding and contracting. It was like, let's say, 2,500 years in the Middle East. And it talked about the Byzantines and the Persians and the Jews and the different empires that they expanded and contracted and expanded and contracted. It's like kind of a fast motion. It's interesting because there's been lots of changes. I mean, even the boundaries, even the borders were set by like some British guy after World War II. He just got a pencil out and said, okay.
But Marty, you know what? Interesting. The Muslims, the Saracens, the Babylonians, the Greeks, all these other civilizations, and meanwhile, Am Yisrael Chai. Meanwhile, it's the Israelis. That I, as an American Jew, can look at Israel and say, they're my brothers and my sisters. We are still surviving. In Israel, they say, Lamrot HaKol, in spite of it all. That all these other nations have gone by the wayside, and we are still not just surviving, but thriving and coming up with incredible medical cures, scientific cures. If Israel can be left in relative peace, I believe she can make the greatest contribution to the world of any country, and that includes America. And I'm a great American, and I love America, but my heart is also very much with Israel.
From your lips to God's ears. Yes, Dave.
So can we pivot for just one
Yes.
observation on the Trump administration right now?
Yes.
There was big news that came out today,
Anyone
right?
else is ticked off as I am?
The
that
Inspector
FBI
General Inspector General report comes
Yeah.
out and said there were clearly crimes committed here. Indictments are coming down. The swamp is going to get drained. A lot of people are going to go to jail.
Yeah.
Now, I've been struggling, and I couldn't figure out why exactly that Mueller has dragged this situation out for a full year. And I came to the realization it's getting dragged out longer and longer because there's nothing there. See, when Comey, prior to the Hillary Clinton's election, when he uncovered all those crimes, he was able to go through the whole thing in 4 days ahead of the election and rule that, yeah, she committed a lot of crimes. So in 4 days, he could do an entire investigation, start to finish, come up with the fact that she's guilty, but hey, we don't want to prosecute. So if there had actually been crimes against Trump, this thing would have been over in about 4 days. But the fact that they can't find anything, it's going to drag out infinitum.
Yeah.
But that's the problem.
Dave, with all due respect, Watergate took more than a year. And I don't know if I share your opinions exactly.
Well, what's funny...
But I think this whole thing has to play itself out. We have to see where it's going.
What's funny is every weekend, what happens? Another person from the FBI loses their job, is forced into early retirement. Another person from the Department of Justice gets forced out, early retirement, shoved aside. Week after week after week, the corruption within the deep swamp is becoming more apparent, and it's slowly but surely getting exposed. I want it to play out too. And I want all the bad guys gone. And all these, you heard what came out today, right?
That they have a spy?
Yeah. At least
An
1 to 2
FBI
spies
spy.
in the Trump campaign.
Yeah.
And what was the trigger for allowing that to happen?
I think it was
A dossier about women peeing on a bed in Russia that never happened?
No.
That was unsubstantiated?
Well, it was paid $6 million. The Hillary Clinton campaign paid for this dossier.
And that was the trigger?
That was the trigger. That's what
Yeah.
they brought to the FISA courts.
Yeah, that's
but
great.
okay, we might be different.
I think we're in a different place.
But does any of that bother you? I mean, could you imagine the George W. Bush FBI putting a spy in Barack Obama's campaign because it was an opposing leader of a political
Marty,
party?
I don't believe that there was a spy, but I'm on the other side.
Okay.
I am on the other side, but you guys have the right to believe what you believe.
So what would it take for you to believe that there was a spy? What if the FBI said, yes, we did have a spy? Would you believe it then?
Then I would believe it.
Okay, do you read the New York Times?
There's a report in the New York Times.
I am so upset with the New York Times coverage of Israel that I have not assiduously read the New York Times.
If you can, do it today.
I have to do a lot more research on this topic.
The FBI makes reference to the mole inside the Trump. Now, what about the dossier? Do you think that actually happened? Do you think that Hillary Clinton's campaign paid for that dossier?
I believe that
It's okay to say
I
no.
believe that our president is guilty of some very immoral things. That's my opinion. I'm not a card-carrying conservative or Republican. I preface my remarks by saying when he does something great, and I think the move toward Jerusalem was great, I will congratulate him on that. The other, I am very, very skeptical.
Well, this is from a conservative point of view. 3 things really bug me. When Barack Obama used the IRS to go after opposing political groups that had Tea Party or Patriot in their
Paid
thing,
millions of fines.
They just paid. They just said the IRS paid. So somewhere in a court, Americans sat down and looked at it, and they paid like $4 or $5 million to like 100 different things that were done again. I don't like it. It smacks of what we were talking about earlier in we're a totalitarian state. And then when you have the crime enforcement officers that are infiltrating an opposing candidate, election with false dossiers that are paid for to Russians. I don't like that, and I don't like that. So let's wait and see if that actually happens.
Marty, I don't know what is the truth, and I admit it. I don't know
When
what
you
is
say
the
What do you
Trump-
think? What do you think about the IRS thing? Do you think that that's true?
What IRS thing are we talking about now?
We're talking about the IRS that infiltrated organizations. Not
I'm
infiltrated.
just hearing about this the last 2 days. I gotta.
But Rabbi-
I gotta
See,
hear
what happens
more.
is
I want to hear more.
everyone's in their own echo
I'm not-
chamber.
no, I'm-
and
Marty-
good, honest people, you know, they don't hear this. If you all you watch is CNN
if
and
something
MSNBC,
immoral and unethical happened, done by the liberals, I will be the first to
But
condemn.
Rabbi,
So,
if Trump is responsible for immoral acts, and I believe he can be has perpetrated some immoral acts.
So you're buying the whole Stormy Daniel
No,
thing,
no,
huh?
no.
Oh.
What I think he has, but what about Kennedy, Johnson, Clinton?
None were saints. for
Okay.
sure.
In fact,
There
Johnson
was a blue dress.
Johnson was quoted as mocking Kennedy because he had more women than Kennedy had. So let me bring that up. What about Johnson, Kennedy, and Clinton? They get the.
No, they're not
they get
getting off the hook either.
The rabbi
I am-
doesn't. You're not getting them off. So why is Trump worse than Johnson, Kennedy, and Clinton? Why? Why are you picking only on Trump?
It's okay. I'm going to let you off the
Right?
I should
Dave,
be
what are
an
your
equal
thoughts?
opportunity
We're
condemner.
in the lightning round, so we're going to
Okay.
go down. Give us your best pearls before swine.
Well, okay, first of all, Israel has my solid support too. I'm a 100% fan of the nation of Israel, and I marvel at the patents, the research, the science, the discoveries,
The Nobel Prizes
everything.
for every literature, science, and everything.
everything that comes out of that nation boggles my mind, and
You
I
guys
love
are
the
off the
people.
charts.
Two, I was wondering if you guys could compare, get your thoughts on how you think, Obama, when he got his salary for being president, and he divvied that up to other people and didn't keep it, versus Trump, where he's given his. Oh, that's right. Obama didn't give away a penny of his, but Trump is giving away all of his. And today he gave a quarter of his annual salary to the Veterans Administration. I cannot believe how that guy shoots himself financially in the foot for other people every day. One last concept. Good guys with guns save lives. The guy in the school,
Dixon High School,
right,
Illinois.
right, stopped a potential mass execution.
Yeah.
And the liberals are going, their brains are going to pop tonight, because more guns in the hands of good guys is a good thing. Go
Same
ahead.
thing happened in Maryland right after
Yep.
it happened in Florida. 30 seconds, lightning round.
I'm not going to talk about guns. I disagree a bit with you guys about that. But name one president who's going to end up poorer at the end of his term. One president of all the presidents.
It's Donald Trump, 100%.
It's Donald Trump. Not every president that I know of came out a rich man.
On the Forbes list, he
Right?
lost $600 million
He's gonna be poor.
last year. On the Forbes list, he
Right.
went down $600 million. You're right. Final
My
word
final
for the
word
rabbi. You're
is I was
closest to
brought
God.
in tonight to speak about Israel and the uprising in Gaza, about our president and our politics. I think it's a mess, totally, and I have to wait and see. And I will be the first one to join your camp if everything that you guys have said tonight turns out to be true, and I am wrong. I will
take
be the
about a week.
first one.
I'll think
Those are my final words.
Read the New York Times. It's all there. All right. Thank you so much for coming in. I want to
Thank
thank
you, Marty.
the author, too, Alexandra Lehman. Get this book. It's a great read, and we'll see you next week. And, shout out to us, Tony Simon. Good to see you. Good night. We'll see you next week on The Marty Heiser Show.